You can see now my screen, and the title of my presentation is Máscara Salva, is a hashtag. So that was in the Twitter, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And is the redefining the self amid the coronavirus pandemic. So it's good that Gabriel has talked a little bit about the context in Brazil, because that's where I'm going to look at from more an academic perspective, more from a scholarly perspective of what is being the use and the way of face masks in public setting. So this presentation explores the use of face masks amid the coronavirus pandemic in the Brazilian context. And as said before, they are also having their own political economic crisis right now. So the wear of protective masks against contagious disease among healthy populations has been recorded since the Spanish flu as a result of public health preventative measures and government policies. On a recent paper about the history of protective masks during pandemic, Strasser and Schillich mentioned that during the 1918-19 influenza pandemic, wearing a mask became mandatory for police forces, medical workers, and even residents in some US cities, although its use was often controversial. Yet in cities like San Francisco, the decline in deaths from influenza was partly attributed to the mandatory mask-wearing policies. At this point, the rationale for wearing masks moved beyond their original use in the operating theater. They now also protected the wearer against infection, and that was in 1918. Such rationale is still supported today under the conditions of the global COVID-19 pandemic, as many governments have decreed mandatory protective face shields and surgical masks for the frontline workers and protective masks like homemade masks and bandana for the general population when sharing public space, when they cannot keep the social distance. Similarly, mandatory mask-wearing policies are still not free from controversies, mainly when the target is the general population. One of the reasons is the lack of consensus among authoritative institutions. For example, WHO and the Pan American Organization of Health use the words recommendations, considerations to the wear of face masks on their reports, whereas local governments enforce laws against general population if the masks are not used in non-health settings. Moreover, the shortages of surgical masks and their high costs due to the demand pressure production of homemade masks that may not follow health safety protocols. So we are dealing here with a high demand and not having enough, with high costs and homemade masks that do not follow safety protocols. Last, to assure effective protection, individuals should be cautious when wearing a face mask, removing it and disposing it, which although seems a simple act, there has been many anecdotes that illustrate people's lack of knowledge of how to handle the mask without getting self-infected. So now I'm going to go into the Brazil context, as you have the next slide. The COVID-19 pandemic has certainly destabilized vulnerable countries which have been facing internal political crises. Brazil is one of them. In response to the Brazilian presidents, now you know Bolsonaro, and you have the picture from previously in the slides that Gabriel presented. So the Brazilian president, with his careless behavior during the pandemic, so it really created lots of reactions, right? So in this, as a response, a group of private bankers, medical professionals, and local corporations have joined forces to create an initiative project called Todos pela Saúde, All for Health, as you can see in the slide. And they kick off a campaign called Máscara Salva on May 1st, 2020. So you can see here in the slide and how, their mission, that is to be for everyone's health. And they launched this movement, Maskara Salva. So there's the hashtag Maskara Salva that people could use in the social media. And they want to remind the population that the mask is for preventative measures, should be used for preventative measures. And they wanted to educate the population how to use it correctly and how to to sanitize it and so on. So this is a group of private organizers, corporations that took the lead in response to the president that seemed not to be caring about his own citizens. So the campaign, that's Maskara Salva, involves the participation of celebrities, recording video clips. For example, you have here on the screen a singer, a male singer called Roberto Carlos. If you're not familiar with Brazilian culture, that he's an icon in the Brazilian popular music. And also have here Ivete Sangalo on the my right here, that she's also a very famous singer for a younger generation. So you have two generations here. He is almost in his 80s. He just turned 79, and that was also he had a live singing in also celebrating his birthday. And you have Ivete Sangalo, that is a younger person, right? And she also campaigning for wearing the mask. So these artists, these two of them, and there are others, they endorse the use of face masks for the general population. The public identify with the celebrities who set a model to be followed. In this case, it is to incorporate a new habit of wearing a face mask, which is framed under the discourse of self-care and care. As Sustein states, people are especially likely to conform when the group consists of people whom subjects like or admire, or with whom they otherwise feel connected. So it's much easier to educate the mass through celebrities rather than teachers or scientists that the mass wouldn't be seeing themselves. So it's easier to deliver the message and help them conform with once they see that their idols are doing that. Thus, by adhering and conforming to the campaign Maskara Salva, Brazilian citizens expressed their disapproval to the president after his notorious response to the media, and so what, showing that he neither fears the virus nor the death that lurk across the country. His citizens lose trust in his governance for being not a good enough president in Winnicott's sense, that abandons his people. In this manner, conformity gains political dimensions when Brazilian citizens decided to wear the face mask that symbolizes their discontentment and shaming for the president. So I use here the notion of conformity, and I want to understand that the ones that are, wearing the mask and tweeting Maskara Salva, they are conforming. And to tell you the truth, I was interested because when I start reading about the news in Brazil, being here in Canada, but reading the news about Brazil, I was wondering if, it's a big country, if the people would adhere to this new habit. So that was my hypothesis, if they would. So then I started researching more about this new habit there. The study of human behavior in relation to conformity, that means to follow the crowd, has been widely studied in experimental psychology. The famous experiments conducted by Ash and Milgrams in the 50s, 60s have shown that human beings conform before an authority figure and under peer pressure, without questioning the validity of the information, the degree of ethics, or the common sense. In other words, under peer pressure, an individual internalizes some information, habit, or even idea, even if they have initially believed it was incorrect or unethical. In the example of the Máscara Salva campaign, some individuals may feel under peer pressure and feel compelled to wearing a face mask even when it's not necessary, such as performing solo activities as jogging, walking around an empty park, or driving a car. The conformity to wear a face mask is due to the uncertainties created amid the pandemic. In fact, the individual lacks the scientific knowledge that can explain to themselves how a face mask can prevent infection. As Sustained states, difficult tasks leave people with a great deal of uncertainty about whether they are right. In such circumstances, people are all the more likely to give way to the views of others, simply because those views may well be the most reliable source of information. The peer pressure in the Máscara Salva movement is created by the social media, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, that focus on delivering convincing messages through well-elaborate rhetoric strategies to stir up the audience emotions. The mass will not search for scientific papers to confirm the functionality of wearing face masks. And in case they do, they may find out evidence to attest its efficiency as a preventative measure against the spreading the coronavirus, but not evidence for its status of being a savior. For this reason, I examined the hashtag Máscara Salva across Twitter in order to identify arguments of conformity to the wearing of the mandatory face mask and to explore them as a transitional object that reshapes the self. I argue that the arguments of conformity may be used as a coping mechanism to deal with one's deep emotions while exceeding their resilience threshold level, which increases their vulnerability to anxiety and depression. So for this work, I use a software called QDA Miner so that I could extract the hashtag Máscara Salva from the Twitter. And it was between the period of May 1st and to May 18. And I reached a total of 759 Twitter messages. So you can see here on the screen, as the keyword Máscara Salva, COVID, wear them, and mask, and others that are a little bit contextualized here. But out of these 759 messages, I sorted them out and created categories to organize the data, which were reduced to 260 messages that deal with conformity, non-conformity, and adaptation to the mandatory face masks. And I'll briefly describe the categories. So just for you to have an idea, out of the 759 Twitter messages, Máscara Salva was the most, frequent keyword. And then the next one that is stay at home, and then would be to use the mask and so on. But that would be stay at home is another message also that has been spread by government policies and health communities, right? And this is something very difficult for Brazilian people to stay home. So wearing masks and staying home are really very difficult habits for Brazilian people, for the mass to follow. So it's changing habits. That's why I was so much interested, right? Knowing the culture, how these would affect them. So I have then here the 216 Twitter messages, and I have here on the slide the classifications, the coding that I have for them. And I have three main ones, that's adaptation, conformity, and non-conformity. So the first category the adaptation, as you can see, is divided into human and object. So I called it human because there were messages with tone or joke in the Twitter and or message that attenuated the gravity of the pandemic, or to get used to this new object, imposed object, that is the face mask. The object itself, right, refers to the mask as an independent item with shape, color, texture that people can handle with, wear, and dispose it. The second category, that's where I was looking more into my work, is the conformity. Is where messages that endorse the Máscara Salva movement, along with the government decisions, the local government decisions that usually go against the president. So enforcing the wearing of face masks, having even fines, punishing people with fines. So if they are in the public space, they have to wear them. So these messages, all right, so also hold the position that face mask, or the belief that face masks save from the coronavirus. And this is the issue because it doesn't save, all right, but the way it has been can be misunderstood as that if you wear, you're completely safe and nothing's going to happen to you. So this is what I was worried about when I was reading those messages. The subcategory consciousness, so under the conforming messages, is to raise public awareness and reinforce citizens' moral obligations to wear the mask for self-care and care for the others. So in this regard, the next subcategory is self-care, and care speak for themselves, very clear. The act of wearing a mask in public is a demonstration of self-care and care for the others. Now, another interesting category is fashion, right? That is a conforming message that recasts the face mask as an accessory that can adorn a person, distancing from its original functionality of prevention and salvation. The next one is preaching. That's a little bit of educating people, but more into the preaching level. That is conforming messages that attempt to educate and convince people. That's why I say preaching, more about convincing people of the need to wear face masks in order to combat the spread of the virus. The next one is public shaming, and that would also go direct against the president's behavior. And these criticize people who are not conforming by not wearing the face mask in public areas. The last is conformity category is solidarity. And that's an interesting one as well, because these are messages to congratulate the organizations and municipalities that have been sponsored or have been supporting the campaign. And you'll see example later that you're gonna, if you know some of these big corporations, you'll recognize them. And the last category was that I was so interested, and who is not conforming? So non-conformity. And these are messages that questions whether face masks can save, or in a way showing distrust to the campaign as well. So next I have here then some examples that I'm going to share with you from the Twitter. So you have the Portuguese and the original one, and the near translation of that. So adaptation of human and object here. I have, for example, I needed to go out yesterday. Everyone was wearing the mask. A young man carried it by its elastic band. A lady had it hanging on her bag. An old man had his nose out of the mask. Another one wore it as an earring. So the most important thing is to wear it correctly. So in a way, it's humor, but also criticizing people that this is an object, the mask is an object, but has to be handled properly. So there is a tone, at least for me here, that's so humor, but talking about, people that, you have to do it correctly to prevent yourself, to care about yourself and the others. So this is one example. Another example of conformity I try to give one example that has many categories together, overlapping. That's consciousness, care, self-care, solidarity. So you can see here the solidarity corporations, worldwide corporations that you may even know them, and they are also located in Brazil. And the Twitter said here, we are very proud that you are wearing the mask and that you have invited everyone to wear one. To wear a mask is to show self-care and care for the other. So very explicit message here, right? Easy to understand these categories. Shaming. This is an interesting one because these are people that conform and then they shame the others that don't, that are not wearing the mask. I have my video covering here, my screen. So the laziness of people that think that they are too macho to wear a mask. So a little bit of in Portuguese view, just to, in Canadian, I try to get, but it's not a translation issue here, but the question here is that some, and this is talking more about the male population that think they are too macho to wear something to protect themselves. So they don't need to be protected because they are men. That's something that we could explore more in questions of gender here, but so far you can get the idea. Preaching, as a mask is not a decoration, mask is not accessory, a mask is not a keyring, a mask is not an object. A mask saves, wear it, and by the way, if you wear it down on the chin, it's better not even to wear it. So what you have here is somebody really screaming and shouting and to, preaching. And fashion, so here talks about how beautiful it is, the femininity and the print. So you can see that here, trying to sell the mask as something that is going to adorn yourself, adorn you. And nonconformity is when it's not agreeing with that. And somebody said here that according to some research specialists, mask can destroy the immunologic system, and the aftermath of the lockdown, there will be other diseases coming up. So as you can see from here, right, these messages, they have a lot to give us lots of things to think about and discuss. So I will now evaluate them in a general way. As seen, to conform with wearing a face mask means to believe in the statement that the masks can save and must be worn in public areas. Thus, conformity here involves beliefs and actions that a group can control. And if you adhere to them, you'll become part of the face mask community, receiving the approval and trust, and grant you a certain identity. In other words, you'll think and act as your neighbors do. The argument of conformity is strongly constructed on the grounds of self-caring and care for the others, the dearest ones, and on the consciousness of saving oneself and the other. Otherwise, you're putting one's life into risk when infecting the others. Wearing a face mask in public space is a symbol that identifies you as a compassionate person who cares for the others, a responsible citizen, and a solidary human being. Although Máscara Salva campaign has its own merits, we should not ignore what lies underneath the argument of conformity. Our deep emotions, that is, our fears, that can lead to anxiety and depression. The presence of a face mask reminds us of infection, sickness, death. Still, for others, it can trigger personal traumatic experiences in order to masquerade the mask or give the mask a make-up advertisement of beautiful design homemade masks in vibrant colors, motifs, textures, and different sizes for babies, children, youth, and adults. And they are widely circulated across the internet. It conforms with fashion, commodity, and fetishism. Moreover, as a standalone object, the face mask becomes personified, or better, deified with its power to save humanity, as some Twitter messages have shown. The visual rhetoric of Christ the Redeemer statue, the conscious cultural icon, wearing the face mask, reinforces the campaign with a religious tone and metaphor. Mask save. Like the Savior, the face mask can save us from distress, danger, and loss. From this view, I'm inspired by Winnicott's work on object relation and the development of the self. I consider the face mask a transitional object that creates an intermediate area of experience, which Winnicott refers as transitional phenomena, with its transitional space. The face mask sets a space between the individual and the environment, that means the other. So the other individuals, in a way, bridging the I in relation to others. The mask creates an intermediate area of experiencing in which an inner reality, experience, a perception by the I, relates to an outer reality, which is perceived by the I and the other. As the data shown, some Twitter messages are located as transitional space, where individuals relate to their insecurities by revealing their dependence on the use of a face mask as a transitional object. Such messages show that they are in denial to their vulnerable condition, and for this reason, they are convinced that a face mask can save themselves from either spreading or catching the coronavirus. This becomes a self-defense mechanism for avoiding dealing with others or one's own fears, or better, for avoiding dealing with their own fears and ignoring their emotions. As a transitional object in Winnicott's sense, we assume that the face mask will eventually lose its function once the pandemic is over, either by the result of herd community strategy or the creation of a new vaccine. It becomes the caffected, similar to a toddler's piece of blanket that loses its meaning to the user. The transitional object concerns an individual's growth and maturation, which leads to the change of the self. So as you can see here, Winnicott, because of time, you have already the time to read Winnicott's here statements regarding to object relating. So I'm just skipping as you can read it. As a transitional object, the face mask reshapes our sense of self as we establish symbolic and relational meanings while wearing it, which may impact on the way we perceive ourselves and interact with others. In other words, the face mask redefines us, our body, and our community. The community, understood here as the environment, can be considered good enough when it provides the individual with trust and support to their adaptation to a new normal. Wearing the face mask conforms with our adaptation to new rules and to a new context that emerges from a chronic economic, political, and social and environmental crisis that has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. So, to conclude, under this course of unprecedented time, new government policies are set without democratic strategies, changing people's routine abruptly. This triggers individuals and society's fears, stress, and anxiety, as seen in the case of Brazil. People resort to post messages and to follow hashtags such as Máscara Salva as a form of coping mechanism to organize the mess that the new normal has created. As Winnicott states, organized nonsense is a ready defense, just as organized chaos is a denial of chaos. The acting of tweeting conforming messages is an attempt to find some sense in the nonsense, to handle the uncertainties, and to navigate through contested discourses that emerge from public health authorities, scientific communities, and government offices. Although we are living through unprecedented time, human beings are wired to be resilient and capable of adapting to new conditions and environments in order to survive. In other words, human beings and the self are seen as a complex, adaptive, and dynamic entity capable of building resilience during a period of crisis. And you have here on the screen Galatzy-Levy's statement about adaptive system live on the edge of chaos. So to conclude, the period of relative disorganization is transitional, as it is the wearing of mandatory face masks and the COVID pandemic. At this moment, we are building our resilience, learning from our fears, and conforming with procedures that we believe can keep us safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I got my own mask. Thank you so much for the talk. Masks here in Germany are not only a fashion piece, but they're also a piece of advertisement. So my company actually put their name on it, so I can do a little bit of advertisement for them.
Okay. That's a great realia. Thank you for illustrating it.
Thank you so much for your interesting research. And I'm gonna remind the attendees again, if you have any questions towards Andrea, you can use the FAQ tool. So if you want to put anything down there, you're more than welcome to do that now. I guess in Canada, it is mandatory to wear masks, right?
Not really. Well, this is controversial. This is the point, because it's local governments. This is not mandatory, it's recommended. So it becomes up to the person, to the citizen, how conscious they are in wearing the mask. So there's nothing that, so far, that we would pay a fine if we are not wearing them. So some people would do it. And because we are a very diverse population here in Toronto, for example, Asian population, you don't need even to ask them to. They start wearing even before the pandemic started, because I teach international students, especially coming from Asian countries, and they were all wearing the mask in January at the very beginning of the term. So that's why I was interested to know more about the Brazilian habits, because I know that for them, that would be something that you have to impose or pay a fine to do it. Even here too, there are many people that also, think that they don't need it, or there are campaigns, but not, I think, in the sense that it's mandatory, not at this point.
Yeah, well, here is mandatory on public transport and when you go to the supermarket, but not when you're just on the streets, then it's not mandatory.
Yes, well, some local retailers are asking people to wear, because, as I said, the word recommendation, all right, when they use the word recommendation, becomes very dubious. You don't know, like, you cannot force if you're using recommendation. So the word they are using, and this is also the problem that I think that these or any other organization, when they are using recommendations, because actually they cannot make it mandatory, because they also say that you have to take into account the country's context. You're not going to put something mandatory if in the country doesn't need that. So it becomes up to local governments or countries to establish their own measures and their own policies. And that's why I think it becomes controversial.
Yeah,
because,
but when you go on the streets, you could see the majority in Toronto on the streets. You can see the majority wearing them or not.
Not well. If you're on the public transportation, I think people are more aware of that. If you go to retail stores, like big ones, I've seen that. But on the street, on the parks, and depends, how busy the place is. In Brazil, as far as I know, because I also have family there, to go to the grocery is mandatory, and it seems that some grocers give a mask to people. That's what I know from some people who are living there. They receive a mask at the door. So
yeah. Because it's not always easy to have access to a mask.
No. Yes, the disposable ones, all right? They are giving disposable ones. And I also know from local people there, because I'm from Rio, and Rio is also is big as São Paulo, but São Paulo is bigger, but we also have a lot of very difficult situations there in terms of the communities, the underprivileged communities, and they are very afraid of that, and they are making them at home. So they have homemade around the community. I know from people that living there and telling me, so giving you the data from informants that are living there at the moment. So their own communities organize themselves, and these are low-class communities, and they are organizing themselves to create this homemade mask. But then becomes the issue, all right? What about the safety protocols? What about the material they are using? And I don't think they have the knowledge or even the knowledge and also the conditions, affordability to buy, quality material. So then becomes also other questions behind it. It's a good movement that people are conscious about that, but at the same time, we are also aware of the difficulties that they are facing due to poverty, due to political crisis going on, economic crisis going on. So it's really very difficult for them right now.
Yeah, I find it very interesting, the contrast between wearing a mask as a symbol, not only to actually prevent the virus from spreading, but as a symbol that you're, well, as a symbol for solidarity, but also people wearing the mask and be like, okay, we're wearing mask now we can come close again. So there's this kind of difficulty when it comes to that, with it being a positive symbol and a kind of negative symbol at the same time. So I think
yes, exactly. They are trying to launch the mask as something, as a piece of ornament. So to, as a fashion. So with different colors, different textures, and different sizes. But the thing is that, yes, they think the problem with this is the messages say mascara saves, the mask saves, right? So the mask itself means that, well, I can wear that, so nothing's going to happen to me. This is what it's something that we should be cautious about, that wearing the mask is not that's going to save you, it's going to protect you. And that's where I think it is the question of in this presentation as well, right? And the connotation that wearing, they put, the Christ the Redeemer with the mask, so giving this religious tone as well, that's saving. So can create false ideas about the mask.
Yeah.